The Dilemma of Fragile Pacts. Introduction: Sovereignty and the Limits of Treaties. The modern international system is built on the principle of sovereignty, formally codified in the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, which ended the 30 Years' War. The principalities and estates represented herein, and all others within the Holy Roman Empire, shall enjoy full rights of sovereignty over their territories, and shall not be compelled to intervene in the internal affairs of others, nor shall any external authority impose obligations upon them without their consent. For centuries, this principle provided stability, halting endless feudal conflict, and establishing legal recognition of territorial boundaries. Yet, it also created a structural flaw: absolute sovereignty combined with the absence of an impartial enforcement mechanism. States were empowered to act freely within their borders and often beyond, with no effective recourse for violations. Over time, history repeatedly demonstrated the insufficiency of moral obligations or treaties to prevent aggression and injustice.
In peace and their limitations. The Congress of Vienna and the Concert of Europe, 1815-1848. After the Napoleonic Wars, the Congress of Vienna sought to stabilize Europe through collective agreements. The final act stated, "The high contracting parties solemnly engage to respect and maintain the territorial boundaries of each state recognized in this act, and to abstain from any aggression or annexation of the territories therein, specified without the express consent of all other signatories." The Concert of Europe was established as an informal mechanism for balance of power governance. Prince Metternich remarked, "Europe must be governed not by the mere desire of any single state, but by the concerted judgment of all, preserving the equilibrium which guarantees peace. While successful in suppressing some revolutionary upheavals, this system was largely elitist, prioritizing the interests of major powers while leaving smaller states vulnerable. Compliance relied on voluntary cooperation. When national interests diverged, agreements collapsed. League of Nations and the Kellogg-Briand Pact. The devastation of World War I prompted the creation of the League of Nations in 1919. Article 10 of the Covenant declared, "The members undertake to respect and preserve as against external aggression the territorial integrity and existing political independence of all members of the League." The Kellogg-Briand Pact of 1928 attempted to outlaw war entirely. The high contracting parties solemnly declare that they condemn recourse to war for the solution of international controversies and renounce it as an instrument of national policy in their relations with one another. Despite these high ideals, both failed to prevent subsequent aggression by Italy in Ethiopia, Japan in Manchuria, and Germany in the 1930s. Treaties alone, without enforcement mechanisms, proved insufficient. United Nations, Charter and Security Council. After World War II, the United Nations Charter of 1945 aimed to institutionalize collective security. Article 1 declares, "To maintain international peace and security, and to take effective collective measures for the prevention and removal of threats to the peace." However, Article 27 enshrines the Security Council veto, granting permanent members the ability to block enforcement measures. This structural flaw has repeatedly allowed major powers to act with impunity, leaving smaller nations exposed. Historical examples include inaction during the 1956 Suez Crisis, failure to prevent the 1994 Rwandan genocide, limited intervention in the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine Budapest Memorandum, 1994, and Minsk Agreements, 2014-2015. A modern illustration of treaty failure is the Budapest Memorandum of 1994. Ukraine agreed to surrender its nuclear arsenal in exchange for guarantees of territorial integrity from the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia. The high contracting parties reaffirm their commitment to respect the independence and sovereignty and the existing borders of Ukraine. Despite this solemn promise, Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014 and 2022, proving that solemn pledges are insufficient without impartial enforcement. Similarly, the Minsk agreements attempted to stabilize eastern Ukraine. Minsk II specified, "The participants shall strictly observe the ceasefire regime, facilitate the withdrawal of heavy weaponry, and conduct local elections in accordance with Ukrainian law and the constitutional reforms outlined in this memorandum." Violations were widespread, illustrating the inability of treaties to enforce compliance without an impartial authority.
History reveals a recurring pattern. Treaties and moral commitments fail when self-interest dominates, and there is no neutral enforcement authority. Absolute sovereignty grants freedom, but without accountability or impartial oversight, international law remains aspirational. Thus, the problem is not sovereignty itself, but the absence of enforceable, impartial global law capable of preventing aggression, protecting human rights, upholding international agreements. Shifts the debate from idealistic rhetoric to pragmatic reform. National prototype, the consultative monarchy. Before proposing a global system, consider the consultative monarchy, a model designed to reconcile long-term strategy, expert analysis, and citizen oversight. Monarchical head of state, the guardian, hereditary, non-elected monarch serving as a long-term guardian. Powers include appointing and dismissing the chief executive based on competence and integrity, vetoing legislation harmful to long-term interests, representing national unity, transcending partisan politics, consultative branch experts and citizens, council of experts, scientists, economists, ethicists, and scholars, drafts policy based on evidence and data. Council of Citizens. Randomly selected citizens review proposals for practicality and fairness, preventing a tyranny of experts. Executive branch. Implementers. Chief executive and cabinet manage day-to-day operations, implementing approved policies. Accountability and succession. Multi-layered. Executive, monarch, constitutional charter. Monarchs undergo formal training. Chief executive serves as a check on monarch's power. This model demonstrates that long-term vision, expert policy, and effective implementation can be separated yet coordinated, offering a prototype for post-sovereign governance.
Commonwealth. A world commonwealth is a federal system distributing power among local, regional, and global bodies. Its goal is to solve the enforcement deficit that has historically undermined treaties and moral commitments. Phased implementation. Phase 1. Incremental UN reform. Permanent UN Human Rights Council with binding authority. Supermajority voting to limit Security Council veto abuse. Phase 2. Regional integration. Strengthen ASEAN, African Union, EU. Standardized disaster response, human rights enforcement, and regional security coordination. Phase 3. Global Peacekeeping and Emergency Response Corps. Specialized Limited Mandate Force. Humanitarian intervention, disaster relief, protection of UN inspectors. Rotating command to prevent dominance by any single nation.
Historical and contemporary examples show that proactive global protection is necessary. The persecution of minorities, like the Baha'i community in Iran, illustrates this. Education, scholarships and training, economic assistance, support for livelihoods, safe relocation, asylum pathways, targeted sanctions, making persecution politically or economically counterproductive, concrete statistics on Baha'i persecution. The Baha'i community demonstrates how a sovereign state's actions can fall outside the reach of international law. Arrests and imprisonment. In the first half of 2024 alone, over 400 people were executed in Iran. While not all are Baha'i, human rights groups report that Baha'i members account for a disproportionate number of arrests and religiously motivated imprisonments. Baha'i leaders have received 10-year or longer sentences. Economic and social exclusion. Baha'is are systematically denied education and employment. Thousands of government employees lost jobs after 1979, and hundreds of business closures, dismissals, and property confiscations have been documented. Denial of basic rights. Baha'is are unrecognized in the Iranian constitution. Their right to practice their faith is denied. Cemeteries have been desecrated or destroyed, burial grounds bulldozed. Underscore the point that treaties and declarations alone cannot protect the most vulnerable populations when there is no global legal framework to hold sovereign states accountable.
Of a world Commonwealth tyranny. Federal structure disperses power. Enforcement force has narrow, impartial mandate. Cultural identity. Subsidiarity ensures local control over education, culture, and domestic policy. Peace preserves cultural diversity. Unaccountability. Eliminating veto abuse and integrating citizen councils increases transparency and accountability.
Scientific leaders in action. The scientist leader's metaphor becomes tangible. Climate change. Coordinated global policy on emissions, renewable energy, and disaster mitigation. Pandemics. Global Health Authority manages vaccines, travel policies, and resource allocation. Economic crises. Data-driven policy stabilizes currency, manages debt, prevents systemic collapse.
A pragmatic path. Forward history has shown that, from the Treaty of Westphalia to the Budapest Memorandum, even the most carefully crafted agreements may fail without a global enforcement mechanism. Treaties alone cannot guarantee compliance, and the replacement of heads of state often leads to abrupt reversals of commitments. In this context, the recommendation of Baha'u'llah for governance through a monarchy, with the monarch's power submitted to an elected consultative assembly, becomes increasingly relevant. The monarch provides stability, continuity, and long-term vision, while the elected legislature ensures accountability and representation. The consultative monarchy thus offers a national-level prototype for evidence-based, responsible governance that balances authority with consultation. This model highlights that fears of domination by a globally minded entity are not only addressable, but also underscore the necessity of a limited global oversight force. Without such a mechanism, treaties remain aspirational, and violations go unchecked. A phased approach to a world commonwealth provides a practical, enforceable, and politically viable path forward. UN reform. Introducing binding authority for a permanent human rights council and mechanisms to prevent the veto of essential security actions. Regional integration. Strengthening existing regional bodies, such as the African Union and ASEAN, as nuclei for coordinated governance. Global peacekeeping and emergency response corps. A limited, impartial force focused on humanitarian intervention, protection of persecuted minorities, and enforcement of international law. This phased model allows the nucleus of a global system to grow into a fully operational world commonwealth, one capable of enforcing justice, consulting experts and citizens alike, and holding governments accountable. The proposal explicitly recognizes human self-interest and the realities of politics, preserves cultural diversity and national identity through subsidiarity, establishes institutions capable of reliable enforcement, consultation, and global accountability. The age of impunity and failed treaties can finally end, not through idealism alone, but through the design of enforceable systems that protect rights, prevent aggression, and respond to oppression wherever it occurs. Unguided sovereignty by governments that oppress their own citizens inevitably harms other nations. Consider Iran, which persecutes thousands of Baha'is because their world center is in Israel. North Korea, which denies its citizens the right to emigrate. or the Kremlin's suppression of freedom of thought and expression. These acts are gross abuses of territorial sovereignty, and the international community cannot remain passive. In essence, rescuing oppressed communities wherever they are is not only a moral imperative, but a direct contribution to global peace. A pragmatic, enforceable system that integrates consultation, oversight, and limited enforcement provides the pathway from historical failure to a safer, more just world.